They said it was frozen strawberries, just fruit, nothing more. But when the trailer doors opened and the drug-sniffing dog lunged forward, agents knew something was wrong. Hidden beneath layers of frost, packed between crates of berries, were 906 pounds of methamphetamine, a shipment worth over $12 million, disguised as groceries. This wasn't just a failed drug run, it was a warning, and a glimpse into how far traffickers will go to stay one step ahead of the law. February 16, 2019. A 42-year-old Mexican national pulls into the cargo facility at the Pharr Reynosa International Bridge. Behind him, a refrigerated tractor trailer, the kind that crosses the border every day carrying produce bound for U.S. supermarkets. This one was listed as a shipment of frozen strawberries. Nothing about the truck stood out. The paperwork was clean. The cargo was frozen. The driver had no criminal record, no red flags. But as the dog circled the trailer, it suddenly froze and barked. Inside, boxes of strawberries. But stacked among them, wrapped tight in red plastic, were 350 packages of methamphetamine, a total weight of 906 pounds, estimated street value, $12.7 million. This wasn't a desperate smuggler. It was methodical, professional, organized. Someone knew how to move product through the system, what trucks to use, what routes to take, and how to blend in. But how do 900 pounds of meth slip through the cracks? Unless someone on the inside knew exactly what to hide and where to hide it. It was 8 a.m. when the trailer arrived at the Texas border. The driver didn't hesitate. He handed over his documentation, nodded politely, and waited. The paperwork listed a shipment of frozen strawberries originating from Michoacán, Mexico, one of the country's largest produce exporting regions. But today, this truck wasn't just hauling fruit. Customs officers had no prior tip, no warning. But as the scanner passed over the trailer, something didn't look right. The interior showed inconsistent densities, blocks of material that didn't match the shape or weight of what frozen produce should look like. They called in a K9 unit. It wasn't the fruit that set the dogs off. It was what lay beneath the frost. Officers pulled the shipment. Inside, they found 350 individual packages, each one tightly sealed, each one filled with methamphetamine. The total weight, 906 pounds. That's over 400 kilograms of pure product. $12.7 million in estimated street value, more than some towns' annual budgets. Tests confirmed it. The narcotic was meth, high purity, likely destined for multiple U.S. cities. But questions immediately followed. Who packed it? Who was waiting on the other side? Was the driver just a courier? Or something more? HSI took control of the case. They began piecing together the details, cross-referencing shipment histories, analyzing the trailer's GPS logs, and digging into the exporter's records in Mexico. They weren't just looking for where the drugs came from. They were looking for a pattern. This route wasn't new. It had been used before. In fact, thousands of produce shipments crossed this exact bridge every week. But this load, it had been altered, tampered with at the source. Someone had access to the supply chain. Someone knew how to hide industrial quantities of narcotics inside a refrigerated shipment without breaking the cold chain. The driver, cooperative, calm, and consistent in his answers, was arrested on the spot. But even as agents pressed him for answers, one thing became clear. This operation was bigger than one man. The packaging, the logistics, the concealment, it all pointed to something larger, something organized. As the investigation deepened, federal agents began tracing the shipment's origin, an agricultural facility in central Mexico, registered to a small produce exporter. But no one was home. The building was empty. The records, falsified. A shell company. Another dead end. What looked like a routine inspection had become something else. This wasn't a random bust. It was a window into a trafficking network that had found a way to merge agriculture with narcotics. And if this shipment made it this far, how many others had already slipped through unnoticed? He didn't run. He didn't resist. When questioned, he answered simply. In Spanish, he told officers that he was just hauling fruit, that he didn't know what was in the back, that he was only following his delivery schedule. His past was quiet. Too quiet. No record of arrests, no signs of wealth, no flags, which left investigators with one unsettling question. Was he telling the truth? Smuggling organizations rarely leave things to chance, and they almost never risk product like this without inside knowledge, which meant either this driver had fooled everyone for years, or he was a pawn in something far more dangerous. Michoacan, the shipment's origin, has long been contested by rival groups, most notably the Jalisco New Generation Cartel and remnants of La Familia Michoacana. Both have turned to meth production in recent years. The chemicals are easier to source, the profits higher, and the risk easier to outsource. Federal agents suspected the drugs were manufactured in a clandestine lab somewhere inland, processed into high-purity bricks, and then moved through agricultural routes under the guise of legitimate trade. Refrigerated trailers like the one he drove are ideal. They're less likely to be flagged, less likely to spoil, and they're harder to inspect without specialized equipment. For cartels, that makes them the perfect cover. But who gave the driver his orders? Who paid him? Did he know what he was carrying? Or was he told this was just another run? Some believe he was a mule, paid a small fee to cross the border, never told what was in the trailer. Others suspect he was more than that he had made this trip before, that he was part of a system, a routine. There were no charges made public beyond the initial arrest. No court records, no trial announcement, no conviction. It was as if the driver vanished into a sealed case file. He may have been just a driver, or he may have been the tip of the iceberg. He didn't ask why. He didn't plead his case. He didn't resist. He simply stepped out of the vehicle and surrendered, as if he already knew how this would end. Once the seizure was confirmed, HSI took over. Agents logged every package, every document, every camera angle. They interviewed the driver for hours, looking for names, numbers, contacts, but he offered nothing. No codes, no aliases, no destinations. The case was handed to the U.S. Attorney's Office. On paper, it was straightforward. One driver, one truck, one massive narcotics load. But in courtrooms like these, what seems simple rarely is. There was no trial date announced, no docket number circulated, no public update on the suspect's status. For a case of this magnitude, the silence was unusual. Some within law enforcement circles suggested the case was handed over to a grand jury, that the driver may have been offered a deal, cooperation in exchange for leniency, testimony in exchange for protection. If he talked, no one is saying. If he disappeared, it wouldn't be the first time. In cases involving organized trafficking networks, silence can mean many things. A pending operation, a wider net, or simply a vanishing witness. There was no sentencing announcement, no official charge sheet posted. The media moved on. Other busts made headlines. But this one, this massive seizure disguised inside frozen fruit, slipped quietly into the background. So, was this just a drug bust, or was it something more? A trigger, a warning, or a doorway to something bigger that was never meant to be seen? Days after the seizure, CBP officials addressed the media. They called it one of the largest drug busts in recent memory at the Pharr Reynosa cargo facility. The operation was hailed as a win for border security, a sign that their training, technology, and vigilance were paying off. But behind the headlines, the impact was deeper. The bust triggered a rapid increase in surveillance procedures across multiple border entries. Agricultural shipments, once considered low risk, were now flagged for secondary inspections. Cold storage trailers, in particular, were no longer given the benefit of the doubt. For the first time, frozen fruit was seen as more than food. It was cover. It was camouflage. It was a method. Agro-smuggling, as it's come to be known, blends illegal narcotics into the supply chains of legal commerce. The drugs aren't flown in under darkness or packed into human couriers. They ride in with produce, meat, flowers, even seafood. All items that spoil quickly. All items that demand speed over scrutiny. But for all the enforcement efforts, many questions from that day in 2019 remain unanswered. No one has ever publicly identified the source of the meth. No lab was ever linked. No cartel officially named. But behind closed doors, investigators had suspicions. Michoacan, the load's origin, is a contested region. The Jalisco New Generation Cartel is known for meth production on an industrial scale. The Sinaloa Cartel, though more fragmented, still moves vast quantities north. Both have the resources, both have the logistics, both have the motive. And while no one can say for certain who sent that trailer across the bridge, the style of the operation matched patterns seen before. High purity meth, tight concealment, short transit windows, everything designed to avoid detection, and everything indicating that this was not a one-time attempt. One truck, one driver. But what came with it was more than a drug shipment. It exposed a blind spot in cross-border trade. It raised questions law enforcement still can't answer. And it left behind the most unsettling truth of all. One bust, one driver, but an entire criminal network still possibly untouched. What's the most bizarre smuggling method you've ever heard of? If you find stories like this one as unsettling and fascinating as we do, make sure to hit that subscribe button. We uncover the darkest corners of crime every single day. Next, we expose how a suburban youth pastor built a secret drug empire using donations from his own church.